sheet.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I didn't relabel the sheet. Well, this is a class I think you can pick up and come back to. You probably get tired of it after a while, and then go someplace else, and then come back. That's all right, because the point is to look at the Greek. That's what I always wanted to know: is what does the Greek really say in the New Testament documents? I'm not a Koine Greek guy. I'm a classical Greek guy. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean a whole lot, because in my opinion, and I think I could prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, the Greek that you see is the highest level Greek that they could write at the time, which is Athenian Greek that we call Koine. Koine is more of a, let's see, they call it worldwide Greek, but okay, pardon the term, but a bastardized kind of Greek. It's a Greek that's more like in English, where you've got all the slang and you've got the different cultures applying different words and languages into it. And so it has a lot of new terms that come from other languages, especially from Latin, some language from Aramaic, amen, we see that. We see different, and I'll point those out when we see them. But in general, it's classical Greek, it's Athenian Greek. And if you look at Woodhouse, which Woodhouse is the Bible, not Bible, it is the Bible. It's the dictionary of classical Greek. And you compare that to Strong's and Vine's, for example, and you'll find there's no difference. The point of this class, however, is not to do theology. If you want theology or doctrine, we can talk about historical theology and doctrine. But the point of the class is history, culture, and language. And that's what I do. I'm not a theologian. My expertise is in sciences, but I do dead languages for fun. Anglo-Saxon, if you want to do Anglo-Saxon, I can do that, but I do classical Greek. I've actually written some books and translations in classical Greek. But the big deal here is, like I said, to look at these, and we're 2:10:16, which is not quite halfway through John, but I'll also mention this, and just a reminder, everybody who's been in the class knows this, but English and Greek are completely different, use different outlines or types of writing. This is why if you remember back to when you read the dialogues, if you did, in school, the Socratic dialogues or the, Platonic dialogues, or if you read any of the dialogues in Greek and you read them and you go, they never answer the question. Well, you're correct. They don't. Because in English, we write intro, body, conclusion. We write like the Romans do. The Romans invented this form of writing, and it's the classic form of modern writing today. But ancient languages don't write in that form, and especially Greek. Greek is a logos to an unstated telos. We would call that a logical argument to an unstated conclusion, although a telos is not really a conclusion. And when we look at telos, I'll try to explain it within the context of the Greek. Greek is a very concrete language, a very specific language, and everything we see in the Greek should be looked at as concrete first and not euphemistically. On the other hand, English is a super euphemistic language, and it's not nearly as euphemistic as Hebrew or Japanese, which I use as examples all the time, but it's still very euphemistic. And that's part of the point of looking at the Greek. So we are at 10:17, and I look back at 10:16, and then for if you're new, okay, then I'll show you how we do this and how it works. I want to point out something, and you look at this. This is usually the body. I usually don't give you Woodhouse because Woodhouse is very complex. It usually shows the Greek in Greek and then gives you the meanings of the words. This is from Strong's Vines right here, and this is a classical kind of thing. So this is for this word, poimen, which is a flock of sheep. From Homer, and this is Homer, Odyssey, etc., shows topically, and you notice what the writer of this definition has put in here for us. Of Christ's flock. The body of those who follow Jesus is their guiding keeper. All right. Okay. So in the first century, I'm sure that every single Greek-speaking human being immediately says Philemon is of Christ's flock, right? No, they have no clue. There's no Christ flock. This is a reflection 2,000 years past that, right? So my point to you is this. I very carefully try to make sure we exclude falsity. This is an absolute falsity. There's no way that in the first century people would consider this word to mean Christ's flock. It's, what's that?
Too soon.
It's way too soon. Yeah, it's that's a reflection of 2,000 years of theology and doctrine, but has nothing to do with it. You know, the point is, that's my point. We simply look at the words in the context of the Greek and understand it within that context, and also within the context of the Roman world. So the last one we looked at was 10:16, and here's the translation. I also mentioned this. I do not recorrect the translations beyond putting it in normal English form. There may be some strangeness in there because I'm not fixing it. And I always translate the same words the same way. I do not change the words the way our translators magically change the words, which really bothers me a lot. Anyway, and contrariwise, I hold sheep, which is not out from among this courtyard. And that one there, it is necessary I lead. And they will hear of my tone, my sound, and they will cause to be one flock, one who feeds the flock, the shepherd. Okay, so what I want to point out is we have had, this whole section is about the man born blind. If you remember, we never transitioned from the man born blind, and we moved into about the flock. And the reason it's a big deal is because of the tone, the voice. The Greeks call it tone. It's what you hear. Why? Because you can't see. The man born blind couldn't see, but yet he knew it was Jesus, and he identified Jesus. And this section is not a separate section, although it's separated by a chapter. Remember, the chapters were not added until around 800 AD or so, and then the versification didn't happen until around 1000 AD, and there is no punctuation until about the 15th century. No punctuation. Although in the Greek, we're starting to get separation between the words, which is really good. At least you can read it. But anyway, the point I want to make on this, and this is very important, is I told you that John is probably written to the Romans and Greeks, to the Gentiles, not really written for the Teen Hodos it's written for Teen Hodos, but it's not really written for the Jews. It's very evident, I think, the document was written for Greeks and Romans. And this points directly to that. Because contrariwise, the whole sheep, which is not from out among this courtyard, and that one there, and the courtyard that he's talking about, what courtyard do you think that is? Yeah, the temple courts. And we're going to see more of that. It's going to fit directly into the next real section break, which is very interesting, the section break. So, the Gentiles. The next one, and we're approaching a punchline, a really important punchline. Here's 17 NIV. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. Now, if you haven't been in this class, this is how I do it. I am a mathematician and a scientist, so I always show my work. This is the work. This is available to you too. You can find this. This is the Greek. This is what we call a a parallel or a literal translation, which is not the biggest problem you got to watch out for with literal translations is that the translators can throw down whatever words they want, and they may or may not be correct. Some are obviously correct. For me, that's me as in the first person dative or accusative case. They will many times turn articles into funny things because they don't. Articles in English and articles in Greek are a little bit different. There's a presumed a singular article in all Greek nouns, and to specify Greek with a the, with a, what do you call it, call that a specified article, a specific article. What's that? Definite article. For a definite article, it's always, there is no a. A is presumed in Greek. You have to have a definite article in the Greek to do it. So, for example, and also, as I said, you've got to be really cautious, especially of prepositions or prepositions. Oh, it's not moving. There it is. They will give you primary preposition denoting a channel of an act. Through. Dia means in Greek through. But you notice what our translator did for us. They fixed it. Instead of using through, they decided to use something close. Is because of close to through? Well, some might fight on that one, right? Or argue it. I think you would have a good fight with the translator because I would translate this through. Toto, I don't know, I'm not going to go over every single word, but you can see also, Toto is this, he, she, and it. How many times do you think you'd use this in Greek? Because he, she, and it are neutrals. Or, well, he is masculine, she is feminine, and then you have a neutrum. You know, the gender is for nouns and verbs, not for human beings or animals, right? Because that's the way the world is. So if I have a masculine, a feminine, and a neutrum, why would I need a this? This is a definite type of pronoun. Anyway, in Greek, I see that as kind of overly fixing it for you. Anyway, and then, of course, words like agape. The problem with agape, and let's see what they say. Agape, to love, wish well, to take pleasure in, long for, denotes a love of reason, esteem. Perhaps from agan, to love. No, it doesn't. Agape does not mean just to love. Agape means one thing in Greek. It's the love of the gods. And by the way, human beings cannot agape. It is impossible in Greek. What has happened is, what's happened to agape? Yeah, well, I'd say it's too, what's that?
Christian love or something like that. The unselfish love.
Well, we got 2,000 years of, okay, Jesus in the Greek gave you not a satire, well, satire, what do we call it in Greek? Irony. An irony. He gave you an irony. Jesus told us to love like the gods. And what did every human being in the Greek and Roman world and also the Hebrew world say? It's impossible. I can't do it, right? And then Jesus explains in the Gospels why you can. Why? Because of him, right? It is possible for human beings, and by the way, it goes even further. What are you? This is theological, okay, I'm sorry. But according to Christ, what are we?
Children and heirs of God.
Yeah, we are heirs. We are gods. We are like little gods. We are heirs, and therefore, if you are an heir, you can, right? They call Christians hagios. A hagios is a Greek word for a demigod. Oh, wow. Holy smoke. This is some deep stuff. But yet, within the context, what we've done is we have fixed it so that you don't have to think too hard. I want you to think really hard. I love this Greek stuff. This is so beautiful because it allows us to think. And other words like this, for example, and I'm not going to do this for every verse. We'll just look at the words and look at the things. But psyche, in the Greek worldview, there's sarx, suke, and pneuma. This is suke. Suke, life. No, suke does not mean life. Let me see what they say. Okay, suke. From suko. Oh, breath, spirit, abstractly or concretely. Well, we know that's not what it means at all. Well, close, right? Suke is the unconscious breath. It's the unconscious breath. It's like nefesh. But they, in spite of the fact that they know that it means breath, they translate it as life. I fixed it. They fixed it for you. Anyway, so let's look at this. And I think this way of looking at it, this is a good way of looking at it. If you really want, this is what I do. I go through every one of these and I carefully evaluate every word so you don't have to. So, therefore doth my Father love. This is a King James, because I laid down my life that I might take it up again. And this is what it says, dia, through. To he shared it, to, because it's a dative form of me, the Father, agape. He loves like the gods. That are because I, ego, I place, lay, set the psyche, the mind, thought, conscious breath of me, in order that anew I might take hold of her. Of her, because suke is a feminine verb. So I left it of her. So here's the translation. And as I said, this is it takes it and puts it in a normal English word order. In Greek does not do, in English we do subject, object, predicate. English is very, requires, the form, the sentence form is always the same, or very similar and the same in English. We use form because we don't indicate the dative, accusative, nominative, genitive in English. The Greek doesn't care. They throw them wherever they want. So the nominative forms are everywhere. Usually they put the nominative forms, well, anyway. I put them back into normal English. Through it, my Father loves me like the gods, because I lay my mind, my thoughts and conscious breath, in order that anew I may take hold of them. Now, this is really an important point, because before, what did Jesus say he laid down? Back in 6, do you remember? Back when we were talking about the specifically the feeding the 5,000. What did Jesus lay down for the 5,000? Do you remember? In fact, I may even have it in here. He laid down his sarx, his body. In fact, he said, my body is the bread of life. Remember that? And he said, I offer my body as the bread of life. He laid down his sarx. Now Jesus is laying down his suke. In other words, my mind, my thoughts, my unconscious breath. I lay down that in order that anew I might take hold of them. I also want to point out this word. I gave it to you, lambano. Let's see. They translate it correctly as take. What did the NIV? The problem with lambano, and the reason I want you to see lambano means to actually hold up, to take, or look, they say, or receive. But it means in Greek to lay hold of by aggressively accepting what is available. Okay, I don't know about you, but have you ever received anything by taking hold of it aggressively? Well, I guess you can.
Actually.
I guess you can, right? But the problem with lambano, as I want to point out to you, is lambano is a word that we usually translate, we love to translate as receive. I would never translate lambano as receive. It means to take a hold of it aggressively. So when Christ tells us to take a hold of salvation, he doesn't say to receive it, he says to lambano it. In other words, to grasp hold of it.
To be active, not passive.
Yes, precisely. And I'm afraid that we have, well, what we've done is, okay, you guys go and figure it out for yourself, but because we have to receive everything, they have fixed it so that you don't have to think too hard. But I want you to think hard about this. I think it's very important. As I said, her at the end refers to psychon, which is feminine noun in the Greek. But this is a very important statement. We're going to get to the punchline, because the punchline is really important. Here's the next one in this sequence. 10:18. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. Okay, that looks pretty cut and dried, right? Let's see what it says in the King James and then translation. No man take it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This commandment I have received of my Father. Oh, wow. Cool. We know that half these words don't really exist in Greek the way they specify them, but that's okay. Odis, not even one, he raises up of her, it, her is of suke, up or away from, of me. Other things, contrariwise, I place a lay of her from away from myself. I am out from conferred power. I hold the tene, a place to lay or set of her, and I am out from conferred power. I hold anew. Wow, this is really a complex statement in Greek, isn't it? Laban, to take hold of her, he sure it, the intola, a vanishing point. It's telos, yeah, a vanishing point. Intola, in conclusion, I take hold of from the patros of a father of me. All right, so let's see what this really says in Greek, because we know this. We know with all the, especially when it goes from this big to this big, they fixed it, right? Not even one raises up of mine away from me. Not even one raises up of mine away from me. You can read this lots of ways, right? And you can say, no one changes my mind. No one affects my mind. I'm the one who's in control. Contrariwise, I lay mine away from myself. I am out from conferred power. I hold, in other words, conferred power meaning the power of the world, right? I am out from conferred power. I'm not part of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all that groups. I hold to lay mine, and I am out from conferred power. I hold to lay mine. I hold anew to take hold of mine, to take it hold from my Father in the conclusion. Okay, we just went from something that, our translators made it really simple to, gosh, this is a really complicated statement. It's not that easy a statement. And these are, if you, I would argue, I've written it down for you, but if you look at this and you think about it, you say, wow, there is so much in this that you can gather from it. And, it's not, you could spend hours just trying to delve into the depths of each of the meanings of the point of this. Jesus was a very complex thinking dude. And he did not, the Greeks and the Romans, you can see what they're doing, right? They're listening to these words and they're contemplating them especially within the context of their own language. And how much do you think they understand? I think they fully comprehend what he's saying, right? However, most of us, okay, how many symposiums have you been to where you talk philosophy and philosophy especially, right? These dudes do it all the time. Well, they do for fun. We know Xanthippe. Xanthippe was Socrates' wife, right? We know that Xanthippe had ladies at her house to discuss the odes, the epic poetry, the poetry, and to discuss philosophy at her house, right? We know that all these guys, Socrates, all the middle class Greeks are saying it. Now, you say, this is written for lower classes too. Yeah, to a degree. But what do you think the lower class Greeks do?
They ask.
No, yeah, they ask. Not only do they ask, what do you think they want to do?
They want to be like the upper.
Yeah, they want to be like the upper strata. It's like, okay, so if somebody brings up some term in the marketplace, you want to be scratch your head going, what, right? The level of education compared to today is pretty stupendous, I think. The fact that most of these people couldn't read unless they had a book slave, right? But yet, what did most of the people know? Even if they couldn't read, what did they know? They knew the epic poems. Even the poor knew the epic poems. Why? You know this, right? Why do they know the epic poems? Why did every kid in the Anglo-Saxon world know Beowulf? You know why, right? He heard it all the time because someone said, hey, play Beowulf. Dong, 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 old Beowulf, right? It's kind of, when you need entertainment, you got to have entertainment. And how do they know the epic poems? How do they know the Iliad, the Odyssey? They memorized it through listening to it. Have you ever told your kids nursery rhymes and then they read them to you, even though they can't read anything, right? Because they memorize them. Okay. Anyway, the culture knew its own poetry. It knew its own stuff. And these words, although they are odd to us, not even one raises up of mind away from me. Contrariwise, I lay mine away from myself. I am not out from, I hold to lay mine, and I am out from. I hold anew to take hold of the mind and to take it hold from my Father in the conclusion. And we know what the conclusion is, right? This is, remember I told you this is a late gospel, so they all know the answer. Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. They haven't reached that, that punchline, the death of Christ and the resurrection. But yet, this is a foreshadowing. But the foreshadowing is about what part of Jesus? The suke, the mind. Okay, we have this real problem in English, I think. Okay, and by the way, since I guess we're not gods, except in retroflective Christianity, we're not like Christ. But Christ is telling you flat out, and remember he told Nicodemus, he told you that he is the sarx, that he will lay down his life. Then he told you he's the suke. And he told Nicodemus, what? What exists, Nicodemus, that you're missing? Sark, suke, pneuma. You're missing pneuma. You don't understand pneuma. What do you think we're going to find about Jesus later on? He's going to talk about pneuma. And the reason this is important, okay, you know why it's important. You should know, okay, if you don't know why it's important, I'll explain why it's important. What was the big argument that the Nicene Creed and the Athanasian and also the Apostles' Creed, what was the big fight that caused them not really be developed? I think the Apostles' Creed existed well before the Nicene Creed, but the Nicene Creed was developed. Why? What was the big push for that?
That Jesus was created from eternity.
Arianism said that Christ was not.
God, yeah, no triune
Until
God,
the-
And the biggest problem is, if you're a Greek worldview, what do you know? Sark, suke, pneuma. So what you're saying is Jesus did not have one of those main parts that humanity all have, right? In the modern world, we just talk about life. Oh, there's no soul. You didn't die, right? There's no soul. It's just chemical reaction in your brain. Your thoughts are all chemical reaction. That's interesting. Nobody believes that, right? And plus, remember, although science keeps trying to tell you is math real? Math is as unreal can be. There is no such thing as math in the real world. Math is if you like, it's a spiritual concept. It's a logic concept. It's not within the real world. There is no math in the real world, although you can count sets. But, if you want to talk math, I can talk math. Anyway, that'll bore everybody. Anyway, so this is a very complex statement in Greek. I've got some word descriptions here, but I don't think we need them specifically because you're kind of familiar with some of these. But this is a parallel statement about the seeking of Christ. We saw this before in chapter 6 about sarx in the physical. This is the mind and breath, the nefesh. A very difficult statement, especially in the context of the Greek. But then it goes, the Jews who heard these words were again divided. Now, I want you to remember, what was the last point? At the very end, if you remember, the last section, the part about the man who was born blind. Jesus Pharisees, the Pharisees with Jesus. And why this is important? Because Jesus, okay, some of you might not like to say that Jesus was a Pharisee, but he sure looked like a Pharisee because he was obviously the rabbi of Capernaum. He was obviously traveling with Pharisees, and he's messing with Pharisees, and he's probably had some Sadducees hanging around too. But the big deal is we're going to find out even more about him being part of the Pharisees when we get to Lazarus. But in any case, Jesus Pharisees, it says, the Pharisees of Jesus, in a genitive form. It was Jesus Pharisees that are with him. What did they say? Are you telling us that we are blind? And what did Jesus say? Yeah. But then he gave them an out. He gave us all an out. Because he said, even if you are blind, you can hear the tone, the voice of the shepherd. And therefore you are part of my sheep. Which is a really interesting statement. There's a lot to this. There's probably a lot of hope for us. In any case, this statement, these statements about Jesus laying down his psyche, not his life, although the psyche is part of life. His mind caused a split. And that's what it says, schisma, Pelen anew, it caused to be in the Judeans through the logical arguments, those logical arguments. Anew it caused a split to be in the Judeans belonging to Judea through these logical arguments. So Jesus was making what was obvious to him to be a logical argument with no what? No telos. The telos is, Jesus even says there is an in telos. There is a conclusion, an unstated conclusion. What's the unstated conclusion? How can he lay down his sukkah?
Oh my God.
How can he do it? By death, right? That's the unstated telos, that Jesus is going to die. Like I said, it's a foreshadowing. We all know it because we know Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is, like I said, John is where the Romans and the Greeks said, hey, could you tell us more? And he's telling them more. He's giving it to them in the Greek. So this is what it said. I knew it caused a split. Many of them said he is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? They said we're approaching a punchline. And also a very interesting statement. And many of them said he had the devil. Mad, why hear him? By the way, they've already said this about him. This is longer than the sentence. We have Elijon that were making a logical argument, but many from out of an evil spirit he holds, and he is full of inner rage. manetei. Who, which, what of him you hear. I think it's interesting. Let's see. Did they use inner rage? He is mad. He is mad. They're making a logical, see, but many from them were making a logical argument. He holds an evil spirit and is full of inner rage. Why do you hear him? Why do you hear him? And by the way, here's the question word in Greek. So apart from what you can find, that some website says, yes, in the Greek, the way you know it has a question, because it has a question mark. No, there are no question marks till the 15th century. But if you see the question word in Greek, you know it's a question. Why do you hear him? And this is interesting. The word that we get translated as mad is the word meaning maniac or mania, to rave, full of inner rage. I think it's interesting they fixed the word for us. They didn't want even to have his opponents to say anything negative about Jesus. So, instead of just saying, oh, he was mad, according to them, he had inner rage. So I think it's interesting how we, what do you call it? We fix it. We, simplify, but what's that? We expurgate. We expurgate those things which we don't like culturally to make it sound more better, right? Yeah, you find that all through the Old Testament. Anyway. And let's see, there's an example in the text. There is an apocryphal allusion in this. This is from Wisdom 5:4. Is the RSV. And the righteous man will stand with great confidence in the presence of those who have afflicted him, and those who take light of his labors. When they see him, they'll be shaken with dreadful fear. They'll be amazed at his unexpected salvation. I didn't translate this from the Greek, or I didn't give this to the Greek. They will speak to one another in repentance. In anguish of spirit, they will groan and say, this is the man whom we once held in derision and made a byword of reproach. We fools. We thought his life was madness and that his end was without honor. Why has he been numbered among the sons of God, and why is his lot among the saints? This is a very interesting statement from the apocryphal documents. I told you the apocryphal documents will point to a Messiah more than anything, although the Old Testament, yes, has a much messianic, inclinations. But the fact that we forget or we ignore the Apocrypha is pretty interesting, because the Apocrypha pre-predicts, foreshadows almost all of these very interesting statements. This is pretty close to what we have in John, and I think it's interesting. Of course, it was Greek too, right? So they didn't like it. Won't go through the whole thing. But others said, these are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? Okay, I told you this section is all about the man born blind. And here we have the end point of this. Others said, these are not the words of him that hath the devil. Can a devil open the eyes of the blind? On a word, you gotta look at the words, right? Others, more than two, of more than two. Elijah, they made a logical argument. These, the utterances, and by the way, Ramada are stories. Utterances, no, are not. Estin are of one under the power of an evil spirit. Demonizema menoi, a demon god, not at least a demon. He is powerful, able, or possible to raise a smoke. In other words, to heal, to open up the eyes of the blind. And what I want to point out too is, you notice the words they're using. We have rarely, and I think we saw it once in John, the words diablo, right? Diabolo. Diabolo doesn't mean a demon. Diabolo means an argument, a logical argument with no telos, which I think is very interesting. And then in proper Greek, we get this word, daemon, daemon, which means an evil spirit, a demon or god, which is also very interesting. What is peculiar too is the word daemon means literally an evil spirit. Remember, they're animus. They're animism. They're into animism. So animism is a spirit of God, not Diablo. The other thing they don't say is hagios. Why didn't they use the term hagios? Hagios is a demigod. A demigod. What do you think the difference in the Greek thought is between a daemon and a demigod? Or between a theo, a god, a hagios, and a daemon? What do you think the big difference is? I know I've never asked you to think about this before. This is kind of a new idea. A theo is a god, right? Can be the god, can be Zeus, can be, a goddess, right? A hagios is a demigod. How did you make a demigod?
It's an offspring of the God.
It's an offspring of a god with a human, right? Why wouldn't they call Jesus a hagios? Now the writers might, but why would the general people and the Judeans not?
Because they know Joseph.
Well, if you call him a hagios, what have you just done?
You've asserted that God the Father is the Father of Jesus.
Yeah, you just asserted that he is, no kidding, a demigod, which, it's really interesting. He's not a demigod, he is God. That's what he keeps calling himself. But if you assert he's a hagios, you just said he's a demigod, which means he is God and man, which is really an interesting concept in itself, right? So therefore you have to call him a daemon. A daemon is an evil spirit, a demon god from the animism, in animism. So you say, well, what does that mean? Okay, now the Greeks fixed their religious system. So all the naiads and the dryads and whatever in mythology went from being their own daemons and spirits to becoming demigods. How did you do that? How did the Greeks reform their religion? Any idea? Through myth. They wrote their myths so that all the demigods, all the naiads and dryads, every tree has its own dryad, right? So how do I turn those dryads from daemons to a hagios, to a demigod? Well, I just have a myth that says that so and so, was the progenitor of the dryads. That they were out roaming around and having sex with this goddess or this human, and all of a sudden we have dryads, and that's why all the trees exist, right? Because that presumes that you had to have created humans before the gods or something, or trees before trees. Okay, there's no reason or logic in this. It's just the way you fix it. You fix your problem. But what they're saying is a daemon would be like, for example, an animistic spirit that exists in the world, but not a demigod. Anyway, okay, is this important? I think it's relatively important within the context of understanding the Greek worldview, but it is kind of important within the context of understanding why they're calling him a daemon. Anyway, let's see what this translates into. Others made a logical argument. These utterances are not of one under the power of an evil spirit. An evil spirit is not powerful to raise the smoke, hence properly to open up eyes, to open up the eyes of the blind. This is a setup for the kicker from the beginning of the section. The end of the argument is this. The telos is still in Jesus' words, but it's conclusion from the leaders. This is the telos of this statement. This is the telos of the section. Remember, what's the whole section about? The man born blind. What did it start with? The disciples said, was this man, who sinned? Did this man sin or did his parents sin? Right? Remember that? Way back at 9. That's the beginning of 9. Who sinned? The conclusion of this is others made a logical argument. These utterances are not of one under the power of an evil spirit. An evil spirit is not able to open the eyes of the blind, of someone born blind. That is a stated telos to the entire section. And by the way, within that section, we have the whole thing about the flock, right? The flock and the sheep. And so even if you are blind, what are you going to do? Listen to the tone of the Messiah, of the suke, of the mind of God. All right, now, this is a section change. And you say, why didn't they put the chapter here? Because this is a no kidding section change. Because we go from this to, then came the Feast of Dedication. Jerusalem, it was winter. This is an interesting one. Anyway. And it was at Jerusalem, the Feast of Dedication, it was winter. Egeneto, it caused to be the wind, the Feast of Dedication in Kanya, Hanukkah, into the Jerusalem, stormy weather it was. It was a dark and stormy night. When the Feast of Dedication was caused to be in Jerusalem, it was stormy weather. Interesting. And by the way, I'm not sure what to make of this. We need to really see what this fits in, because we should expect it to be winter in winter, right? But they specified that it was stormy weather. So my question is, how does that fit within the context? Our problem is in English, what do you want? Okay, if I present to you in a setting and I say, oh, it's stormy weather, right? And I give you description, and the wind is whipping through their clothes and the rain is falling down their faces. What do I do through the whole rest of the scene? I'll keep reminding you. Yeah, and you know, he brushed water away from his face, or right? That's not the way it works in Greek. Number one, it's really expensive for me to keep adding words to remind you. And number two, the Greek guy just told you. It's like, I'm not going to tell you again, right? But how does that fit? So let's not forget the context. It's stormy weather and it's winter. To the point that they even make a statement about it, which I think is really interesting. All right. The Jewish custom of Hanukkah, considered a minor Jewish festival today, ranks among the Passover and Purim as one of the most beloved. We know it. We just got finished with it, right? Unlike many Jewish holidays, it's the Festival of Lights, not mentioned. Okay, this is incorrect. It says it's not mentioned in the Bible.
It's mentioned.
The historical, yeah, it was just mentioned just now, exactly. But what's really important to me is it's mentioned, it's recorded in Maccabees 1 and 2. Contained within a later collection of writings known as the Apocrypha. The later collection of writings, okay, number one, when did the Apocrypha get removed from normal Bibles? Remember? 1826. 1826 is an important date. Every Bible prior to 1826 included the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha was always mixed in with all the books until who? Luther, Martin Luther. Martin Luther was the guy who caused them to be separated. Okay, Marty, I love you, but he also didn't like Jude. Let's see, Jude, 2 Peter, Hebrews, James, and there's one more, Revelation. He moved them. He dumped them. Except what did we do? We vetoed it, said, Marty, no, we're disagreeing. I don't care what you think. We're leaving those in New Testament, and except we did do what he said, and we pulled them out of the Old Testament and put them in the Apocrypha. However, every Luther Bible included what? The Apocrypha until 1826. Who pulled them out? The British Bible Society. Why? To save printing costs. The only reason you don't have the Apocrypha is to save printing costs. And if you think I'm wrong, go read it. It's flat out in there because they wanted to save costs. And by the way, they were Anglican, which I'm not against. I love the Anglicans. Anglicans are great, but the problem, the Anglicans were not true to form because the Lutherans say that the apocryphal documents are they're not. We argue that they're not theologically or doctrinally based, but yet they are good for reflection and study. The Anglicans and Catholics and Orthodox hold the apocryphal documents to be scripture and canon. Yeah. Now the Lutherans are supposed to be more Canaanite than that, but whatever, we just dump them. But we don't dump the New Testament ones. Okay, whatever. Just saying. Anyway, so because it comes from the Maccabees, that means it's in the Bible. So for them to say this is incorrect, but I'm fixing it for you anyway. And by the way, you know these guys are suspect because they say BCE, before the Common Era. Before Christ! Oh my goodness gracious, we got to fix that and have before the Common Era instead of before Christ. The Syrian king Antiochus Epiphanes sent his soldiers to Jerusalem. The Syrians, okay, and we'll translate this into real history. The Syrians desecrated the temple, the holiest place to the Jews at the time. All right, that wasn't their opinion. They didn't desecrate the temple. The temple in Jerusalem did what? It desecrated the rule of Greek and Roman worship because it had a mezzocline. It had a wall that incorporated the altar. The altar of a Greek, where you kill animals in a Greek, for Greek sacrifice, cannot be in a temple. That's considered abomination. So when they found that, what they do? They destroyed the mezzocline, and because they worship Zeus, they said, we're going to worship Zeus by doing what? Sacrificing pigs, because Zeus is in pigs. Matter of fact, you go to Greece, what do you get in the main meal in Greece? Pork. It's delicious. They make the best pork in the world. Anyway, so they've always been that way. Anyway, so Antiochus abolished Judaism. Okay, I want to put this. All right, everybody until the Romans abolished the other religions in an area. Why? Why did you abolish the religions of the area? To destroy their culture and also destroy their gods. Because, okay, now this happened. This is what happened. When, what's his name? The Greek guy that took over the world, Alexander. When Alexander the Great came across the world and conquered the known world, okay, what was the presumption of every culture except the Hebrew culture? What was the presumption? Why did they succeed? Because the gods of the Greeks were more powerful than the gods of the other places. We don't understand this idea about landful and gods. The idea of the gods, and if you remember back when we looked at Hebrews, the question for the Hebrews was, this Jesus God, this Yahweh God, do they apply in other nations and other places? Do the gods of the Hebrews, Jesus and Yahweh, can they even work in Rome or in Athens? This is a question. Or in Alexandria. That's a question. Why is that a question?
That's the way they all thought, like all of human history.
That's right. That's the way all of human history is. I have my gods. My gods are part of my land. The gods are part of my culture, are my thing. Alexander the Great changed the world because when he went roaming through, what did he do? He took over, and the presumption was that therefore the Greek gods were greater than all the other gods. So what happened? We call it Hellenization. The Hellenization of the world, because everybody except the Jews wanted to then take in the gods of the Greeks. And so therefore their architecture, their education systems, everything became part of the Greek. They assimilated the Greek. The language, that's why we have Koine Greek, is because the language, everything accepted the Greek. The only ones who wouldn't were those rascally Hebrews. And the Hebrews, okay, usually they didn't have to abolish. Matter of fact, the Romans learned this lesson very quick. The Romans learned it from this guy, Antiochus. Because when Antiochus went in and he got rid of the religion, the Romans had tried this before in other places, and it failed miserably. What happens is when you destroy the religions of other groups, you basically harm their culture and their economies. And what happens is they stop doing what?
Paying you.
Paying and producing, yeah. And so the Romans got really smart. The Romans said, hey, you can keep your religion, just don't proselytize. Don't proselytize. We're happy with that, right? And therefore, what happened? The people are happy, the cultures are happy, they keep going. And by the way, what happened within all those cultures? The Romanization. We don't talk about the Romanization of the cultures, but the cultures really did Romanize. Look at English culture, right? How many vestigial whatever pieces of Roman, remember, you guys probably have never studied it. I've really studied it. How many of the Roman gods became gods in the Anglo-Saxon and English pantheon? About half. They either assimilated them or they didn't have one. There was no goddess of justice. There's no god of justice in Anglo-Saxon gods. So guess what the English did? Let's see her name, Mario Probeus. You know the lady that holds the thing? Her name is, she originally didn't have a blindfold on. Her name is Mario Probeus. They took her whole name and everything, and she's the goddess of justice in England. And many times you'll see pictures of her. She wears like, a woolen robe, usually covering all of her, stuff, because it's cold up there, and plus they were a little more, modest than the Romans. But so she went from having a bare breast to having totally covered because it's cold, right? But they just took her. They took the whole of her. They took a lot of the stuff. Matter of fact, the Hagia Sophia. Where is the Hagia Sophia in England? There's lots of them. Why? Hagia Sophia is the Greek word that's used usually for the Hagia Sophia. That's what they call the churches, the name of the churches. So the Hagia Sophias in England, they just took the Greek names. So this Hellenization and this Romanization of the world happened in all these cultures. So one of the few cultures that basically abolished it was Antiochus, and we're going to find out what happened to poor Antiochus next week. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look at this week. In your name we pray.
Alexander and the Romans both